Welcome everyone to our ESG investing political presentation. I'm Jaclyn Jackson, Senior Portfolio Manager at the Center, and I'm honored to be joined by my colleague, Kali Hassinger, who is a certified financial planner. Thanks for tuning in. If you're anything like me, you've probably heard ESG investments mentioned in the news more over the last 2 months than you have in the prior 20 years combined. In 2022, a Department of Labor rule was put in place to make it easier for fund managers to consider ESG issues for investments and shareholder rights decisions. A bill to prevent pension fund managers from basing investment decisions on factors like climate change cleared Congress on March 1st of 2023, when the Senate voted a 50-46 overturn of the DOL rule. By late March, President Biden exercised his first veto to reject that bill. As we can see, much of ESG's recent popularity or infamy is politically driven. Today, we hope to help you through headline clutter and offer clarity about environmental, social, and governance investing. That being said, here's our agenda. We're going to first define ESG investing and discuss how it made its way into the political zeitgeist. Then we'll discuss ESG integration and the new ESG lens. Finally, we'll round it out with the Center's approach to ESG investing. Now I'm going to turn it over to Kali to talk about what ESG actually is.
Thank you, Jackie. Great introduction. Like you said, what is ESG? ESG is an acronym for environmental, social, and governance. But it's also an umbrella term used to describe the criteria used to evaluate investments and companies. These criteria are categorized and they can be incorporated and evaluated throughout the investment process. The first classification we have here, environmental, is often what people think of when they hear ESG. And perhaps, it may have contributed somewhat to the recent headlines regarding this approach. But as you can see with the examples here, it isn't necessarily a climate change or carbon emissions only focus. There are other aspects that are considered. Examples, again, we're showing regarding the use of natural resources. Are they being managed responsibly and sustainably? How much waste and pollution does a company create? Are they actively participating in deforestation? Again, these are just a very, very few examples of how environmental factors can come into play when evaluating a company for investment purposes. The social classification focuses on the treatment of or consideration of people and relationships. So many people, again, when they hear this, may immediately relate it to the diversity, equity, and inclusion developments that have evolved and, again, become politicized or headlines over the last few years. And yes, diversity, equity, and inclusion is certainly part of it, but there are many other considerations as well, and they relate to the overall experience that employees and the public have related to this company that's being evaluated. It can include initiatives like, is the company hiring and actively including veterans in their processes? Does the company have strong data protections in place? Do employees have access to healthcare, for example? Tesla made headlines recently because it was actually purposefully removed from an ESG benchmarking fund. And when we hear Tesla, we think it's an environmentally friendly company at the forefront of that electric car initiative. However, many employees complained about their treatment, their circumstances, and their overall experience working for Tesla. So that brings us to the last piece here, which is governance. And this focuses on the standards and practices for how a company is run. A few examples we have shown here. What is the executive pay? Is it astronomical? Is it reasonable in line with the general staff compensation? Is there board diversity? Hopefully, there's a lack of bribery and corruption. And also, how does the company handle political lobbying? So yes, ESG is an umbrella term, but there's many different factors coming into play, and the items we have here are an extremely limited sample size. So just keep that in mind.
Okay, Kali, I am going to address the elephant in the room. Wish me luck here.
Very
So
touching.
thank you. Last fall, I attended an ESG summit hosted by Investment News. They featured an engaging presentation called Addressing Anti-ESG Sentiments. The speaker took on the term woke ESG head on. In our polarized political environment that takes courage, and yet as researchers, investors, and advisors, it's our responsibility to enter those murky waters and separate the water from the mud. Now, what's murkier than the meaning of the word woke? It's now become this nebulous term used to incite emotion from others. But I wanted to do a little bit of research on the history of the word. So based on the article, A History of Wokeness, written by Vox journalist Aja Romano, the word woke has been around since 1938. It was first used by blues musician Huddie Ledbetter in a protest song. Ledbetter used the word in explicit association with Black Americans' need to be aware of racially motivated threats. Over time, the word took on additional meanings in the Black community, but has largely remained true to Ledbetter's original usage. In 2014, the word entered the world zeitgeist through media coverage of the Black Lives Matter movement. It drew political division. The word woke represents an awareness of race-specific threats by Black Americans. It is tactically used by Black Americans to avoid race-targeted negative outcomes. ESG strategies, on the other hand, use environmental, social, and governance criteria in addition to traditional valuation methods and criteria to assess the risk profile of a company. Uncovering a wider range of risks is intended to help analysts more accurately identify the intrinsic or true value of a company and its ability to be profitable. Politicians on both sides invoke politically charged language to incite emotion in voters. Woke ESG is the latest example, but it surely won't be the last. There is a moral imperative to ESG investing, but not a political imperative. According to the Investment News presenter, a 2022 Gallup poll revealed 88% of Americans think companies should try to make the world better. While political lines remain divided, most Americans are not divided on this topic. Consequently, this implies companies that understand how to adapt their business models to a better world consumer sentiment may be less exposed to certain risks than companies that can't.
Thank you, Jackie. I really like that you were able to practically and historically distinguish the term woke from actual ESG investing. And in reality, we find that ESG investing is about broadening how we evaluate company risk. I'm going to give a little bit of a history lesson also, as Jackie just did, and I think it might surprise some listeners to learn that the ESG investment approach has roots dating as far back as the 1700s, and it was first introduced by the Quakers when the church essentially restricted how their pupils could do business. Specifically, they were not allowed to participate in the slave trade, and they were not allowed to engage in activities like drinking alcohol or smoking tobacco. So long time ago. Over time, this has evolved, of course, and I would say in the nearer term history, it was often referred to as SRI, or socially responsible investing. So SRI, if you're familiar with that term, still provides strategies that we use today, while ESG, on the other hand, provides the criteria necessary to screen investments. So they're still working together in a sense, but the term ESG has really taken hold just to describe this overall type of investment approach. The first SRI, or again, ESG, if we're talking evolution to today, type of investment fund dates as far back as 1928. It was an investment fund called the Pioneer Fund. Again, this was religiously motivated, and it purposefully excluded investments that were viewed as sinful. Again, alcohol, tobacco, for example. But it also, excluded other business ventures that didn't align with religious guidelines or moral code at that time. So this approach, where something is excluded purposefully, eventually expanded to include different industries, ventures, the general public sentiment at that time. And, we're seeing that progression continue today. So many ESG funds, avoiding fossil fuels is something you may think of. Avoiding companies that test on animals, or even the weapon industry, depending on where the values align. So this approach, this exclusionary approach, may be the original ESG investment approach, but it's certainly not the only way to screen investments or to invest with an ESG lens today. So there are several ways and several investment or ESG investment screening strategies. And we'll touch on a few here in a minute, but not surprisingly, ESG has evolved since 1928, or even, of course, from the 1700s. And although someone may choose to invest with ESG because of religious or moral reasons, it's no longer rooted in that religious value. It's, overall an agnostic approach. Of course, coincidentally, investments may align with an investor's beliefs. And I think many people do come to ESG for that reason. But it's not just morally or value driven. The new ESG lens has developed with the idea that companies that are run well, companies that treat employees well, companies that have a diverse board, or treat our natural resources with respect, just a few examples, will also perform well and can adapt to changes or challenges over time, ultimately making them good investment opportunities. Jackie briefly touched on that earlier. We often talk about headline risk here. There may be a very well-established company with good financials, but if there's a scandal, the overall value of that company can drop drastically in a short period of time.
Yeah. Or, Kali, if I can interject, we think about, I'll just give a quick example. Let's say that I am a large makeup company and I've been established for a long time. I have a lot of market share, and, I'm a big deal. Now, let's say a disruptor makeup company comes along and offers a variety of shades, or a greater level of foundation shades to its consumers, or to all consumers, right? So as me, big marketing or big makeup company, can I compete with that disruptor? How does that influence my ability to make profit, right? Will more people gravitate towards the newer foundation company, the new makeup company? And really, we might think about that idea of, okay, the disruptor makeup company is offering a greater variety of makeup shades, and maybe that has some inclusion or diversity undertones. But the reality is that offering more products appeals to more consumers, and in essence, creates more profit for that company. And so, Kali, you mentioned the word agnostic before. I think, anytime we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, anytime we think about some of these very charged issues, we kind of have a lot of emotion attached to it. But the reality of it is, as an analyst, you're really just evaluating a company and seeing how that company performs in certain environment conditions, right? So in the instance, if I'm an analyst evaluating makeup companies and I'm seeing that, a newer company has created a greater niche and appeals to more consumers, well, that company is going to, obviously that company might be able or have the potential to create more profit. And the older company may, be exposed to greater risk, right? That we don't see when we only appeal to traditional valuation methods.
Exactly. That's a great example. Because now, really we want to blend those factors. So if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide.
Absolutely.
The traditional financial analysis approaches, such as valuation models and multiples or credit and cash flow assessments, are all completed. It's a blending, again, of those quantitative measures along with the qualitative measures based on ESG factors. And this approach can really complement or be added to any actively managed funds analysis process. So, exactly what Jackie was touching on, if two possible investments or two possible companies are being evaluated and they appear to match one another from a financial opportunity standpoint, how do you decide between the two? Well, that's a perfect opportunity to layer in those qualitative ESG analysis factors, and they can ultimately be used as the determinant, right? So this analysis, doesn't necessarily need to review companies from an ESG perspective, or it doesn't need to fit within environmental, social, and governance factors. It can be chosen based on a positive screening of only one, for example, and perhaps that allows the company to better evolve and adjust unforeseen circumstances. So it's really a minimal reduction in the investment universe, which we have noted here, but we also previously discussed that exclusionary approach. And that does still exist. So there are three kind of different ways in which the ESG integration can be used. Of course, it can just be part of that analysis and layered in. But if desired, the exclusionary approach certainly still exists, and it can purposefully, for example, exclude entire industries. This is often still driven by investor values. For example, we have clients that ask to avoid fossil fuels, and these funds are available to meet the need. Other, screening approaches focus on sustainability, for example. And we have noted here that these are outcome focused because these companies are not necessarily required to screen well from a sustainability perspective now, but they may be focused on making a change. And if that outcome is positive down the line, they can still screen well and be incorporated in an ESG focused investment fund. So it kind of takes that short-term mindset away. Our markets are very often driven by earnings season, those quarterly reports. This takes a longer term approach. These, can also include an impact investing approach or lens. And this focuses on accomplishing a specific goal through investment. So an example, companies that create access to clean water or provide safe housing, there are funds that can focus on these specific needs or, values for investors. I don't necessarily think that should make up your entire portfolio, but it's an option where your money can meet your values. So, these are possibilities, but I think one of the harsher criticisms or concerns that ESG often faces is performance is going to suffer. So as we discussed earlier, ESG integration incorporates and uses the same financial screening factors as any traditional financial analysis. There may be some trade-offs to consider, if an investor purposefully is choosing funds that implement some of those other approaches that we just discussed, like exclusionary sustainability or impact investing. But, that's going to innately skew the portfolio in one direction. It's just important that it's understood when you choose that as part of your overall portfolio or allocation. And, Jackie spoke earlier about some of the shifting trends that we're seeing with ESG, often driven by headlines and politics. But in reality, ESG has had a huge influx of money over the last several years. There's a big push in international space to regulate ESG and incorporate ESG. And when we're talking about companies that can adapt and do well, there's going to be periods of outperformance like we saw in 2020, but just as in any asset class, there's also going to be periods of underperformance. And that was experienced by many in 2022. I think it was partially influenced by the fact that the only kind of sliver of positive performance we saw was in oil, and many ESG funds do exclude fossil fuels. But hopefully that is, again, understood and incorporated purposefully by the investor. So whether that and, the overall political environment will have a long-term effect on ESG trends, it's yet to be seen. Hopefully, based on what we shared today, you now have a better understanding of, the idea that this type of exclusion or that old school SRI investment approach isn't a requirement for a fund to be ESG focused or have a positive impact in both the short and the long term.
Absolutely. That was a great covering of that, because in 2020 we saw ESG funds like really outperform, and then in 2022
Yeah.
things went in a different direction. So and I think that's something that as investors we have to understand. Volatility exists, and that's a part of the ride of investing. So thank you for letting us, or for opening that up for discussion, Kali, because that is a major consideration. So that being said, I sort of want to shift focus or pivot into the center's approach to sustainable or to ESG investing. So let's dig into the construction considerations of the center social strategy, which is our answer to investors looking to use value-based investments to achieve their financial targets. ESG funds draw attention to security selection, but that's actually a small part of creating an impactful investment strategy. We don't want to forget about construction fundamentals because they significantly contribute to an investor's chances of reaching their financial goals. Take asset allocation, for example. Asset allocation is the stock to bond ratio suitable for one's investment goals. Conservative research attributes 40% of investment performance to asset allocation, while liberal evaluation suggests as much as 90% of investment performance to asset allocation. You can see this is an important step that cannot be overlooked. Next, I want to highlight fee sensitivity. The reality is that investment costs add up, and the compounding effect of those costs diminish returns. Therefore, considering the cost of funds is a vital part of developing investment strategies. Diversification is another core investment philosophy at the center, and it largely influences our preference for ESG investments over other values-based strategies, like Kali mentioned before, exclusively exclusionary practices. I want to stress, factors outside of security selection play a prominent role in building a robust investment strategy. Keep in mind, values-based investing adds to the construction process. It does not change the foundational layers of that process. So now that I've adequately addressed the more meaningful components of construction fundamentals, let's talk about security selection. Our ESG strategy goes through the same labor-intensive screenings and processes that we've always used, including both quantitative and qualitative screenings. I want to go over 4 things. First, we make an effort to work with companies that have a reputation for walking the walk. Fund managers of those companies have demonstrated a longstanding commitment to values-based investing through engagement with companies to improve behavior or using shareholder voting power to advocate for better company governance. The second thing, we also like to see how funds perform over a market cycle, so we largely eliminate trendy funds that haven't proven themselves over time. Third thing, we meet with fund managers and company representatives before we add funds to our strategy, and we continue to meet with them regularly as a part of our due diligence process. Fourth and last, we also run our funds through routine criteria checks to ensure fund continuity. So those are the key aspects of our investment process. I hope that was helpful. Now let's wrap it up.
Thank you, Jackie. I just want to say, I think it's really important that you highlighted that our ESG portfolio or strategy, again, goes through the exact same process from a financial and analysis standpoint as our traditional portfolio. So thank you for highlighting that.
Yes, let's emphasize that. That's true. And you know, ESG investing, there's an overlay, right, on top of traditional investing. So you're not going without those traditional factors. You are just adding to those factors. All right, so our goal for all client portfolios, speaking of which, is to receive the same tailored approach even when utilizing our ESG social strategy. We only take on as much risk as necessary to achieve your individual goals. All right, and with that, you made it. Everyone viewing, you made it. Thank you for being with us. We hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for offering us grace as we tackled the behemoth that is American politics. I'm wiping my forehead here. Please note that if you are new to the center, this is a 2-part session. We offer a 20 to 30-minute session with one of our financial advisors to discuss your specific investment needs. If you're a center client, we're always available to assist you in any way we can. Don't hesitate to call us.
Thank you so much.
All right. And with that, thank you, Kali, for doing this presentation with me. On behalf of us and the rest of the center team, we thank you and ask you to remember to live your plan.